And it's Story of the Day time, and we're returning to Grandpa's Great Escape by David Walliams. And we've got to chapter 54, and at the end of the previous chapter, Grandpa had just said to Jack, let's take to the skies, and Raj had been talking to Jack about how through Jack, Grandad was able to relive his glory days in the war. So, chapter 54, Racing the Sun. Moments later, the three were sat on Raj's beaten-up old motorbike, speeding towards the Imperial War Museum. The faster they went, the more the motorbike rattled. Jack, who was squashed between Raj and his grandfather, was worried the little old thing would shake itself to bits. They were racing the sun coming up. The hope was that if they could arrive at the museum before dawn, they had a much better chance of stealing the Spitfire. That way, they would still be under the cover of darkness, and, with any luck, the Gorilla-S security guard would not have started his shift yet. It was so early, all the roads were clear of traffic. It only took an hour to get to the museum. They only passed a few cars, a couple of lorries, and an empty bus. The world had not woken up yet. Raj dropped the pair off outside the Imperial War Museum. The place was deserted, save for a flock of pigeons on the roof. "Good luck up there, Wing Commander, sir," said the newsagent with a salute. "Thank you," replied Grandpa with a nod of his head. "And good luck to you, Squadron Leader," Raj saluted the boy. "Thank you," he said. "Be safe now, you two. By the way, there is no charge for that half-eaten chocolate bar you found on the floor of my shop." "Most kind," replied Grandpa. Finally, Raj pulled back the throttle hard on his motorbike and rattled off down the road. So, after escaping from one heavily fortified building, Jack and his grandfather now had to break into another. Being full of priceless historical artefacts, the museum had excellent security. A quick sweep around the outside of the building only confirmed what Jack had suspected. All the windows and doors were locked. Last time, Grandpa had walked right in because the museum had been open to the public. This time, it was not going to be so easy. By the time the pair came back to the front, they had all but given up hope. "Some clown has locked up the aircraft hangar," said Grandpa. Jack looked up at the building. High above the Roman-style columns of the museum fronted... High above the Roman-style columns of the museum fronted squatted a large green dome. Dotted along the base of it were a number of small, round windows. They looked like portholes in a ship. One of them appeared to be slightly ajar. Perhaps it could be prized open. But how were they going to get up there? Jack pondered this. He leaned on one of the two huge naval cannons that pointed proudly aloft in the courtyard. Then the boy had an idea. "Wing Commander?" "Yes, old boy." "If the cannon could be turned round to point the other way, we could climb along them to reach the open window up there." The cannon set on a large metal base. Together, the pair tried to push it, but it just wouldn't turn. But feeling underneath, Jack found a number of large screws. "I still have the serving spoon, sir," proclaimed the boy. It was the one he had swiped from the school cafeteria that he hadn't got the chance to give in Grandpa earlier that night. "We can use it as a screwdriver," said Grandpa. Using the handle of the spoon, the old man loosened the screws in no time. With all their strength, the pair then put their shoulders against the base and pushed as hard as they could. It was tough work, but at last the cannon was pointing up at the museum. Jack climbed up on one, while his grandfather heaved himself onto another. Both held out their arms for balance as they edged their way along. After a few steps, Jack realised it was best not to look down, for it was quite a drop. Eventually, Jack and his grandfather reached the roof of the museum. On seeing the Union flag flying up there, Grandpa saluted it, and the boy felt compelled to follow suit. Pigeon poop covered the roof, and it was very slippery, especially if you happened to be wearing slippers. "This one, sir," the boy said, indicating at the little round window that had been left open ever so slightly. Jack managed to force his small fingers into the gap and pull the window fully open. "Good work, Squadron Leader," said Grandpa. The old man gave the boy a leg up. Jack then reached down to help his grandfather inside. the pair had broken into the Imperial War Museum. The feeling landed Jack like an enormous yes. Now, all they had to do was steal the Spitfire. Chapter 55, Driving a Tank. Jack and his grandfather raced down the staircase into the great room of the museum where the aircraft was suspended from the ceiling. The fighter planes had been repaired since the last pair's visit. The Spitfire had been restored to her former glory. On the wall was a winch, and the two worked double quick to bring the warbed back down to Earth. In a nearby glass cabinet stood a display of RAF pilots' flying gear on mannequins. Thinking fast, they pushed an old World War I cavalry cannon that was, in its day, would have been drawn by a horse towards the cabinet. The cannon smashed the glass. As if they had been scrambled, the pair raced to put on the flying gear. The boy checked his reflection in the glass. Goggles, check. Helmet, check. Flying suit, check. Scarf, check. Brown leather jacket, check. Boots, check. Gloves, check. Parachute, check. They had their flying suits on. The Spitfire was on the ground. But amidst all the excitement, the pair had forgotten something. Something big. "Wing Commander," said the boy. "Yes, Squadron Leader." "How are we going to get the plane out of here?" The old man glanced around, a look of puzzlement on his face. Whichever clown designed this aircraft hangar forgot to put the doors in. Suddenly, it was as if a balloon had been deflated inside Jack. Getting into the museum had been hard enough, but getting the Spitfire out seemed impossible. On the other side of the hall, a World War I tank was on display. It was a British Mark V military green with two huge caterpillar tracks. It was so big and heavy it looked like it smashed through concrete. Suddenly, Jack had an idea. "Do you know how to drive a tank, sir?" asked the boy. "No, but how hard can it be?" Grandpa was a man who could take anything in his stride. The pair hurried over to the tank, clambered up and opened the hatch at the top. Plunging down into the cramped cockpit, they were greeted by the most unfamiliar array of pedals and levers. "Let's just try a few of these, shall we?" announced Grandpa. After starting the engine, the old man pulled down a lever, which immediately threw the tank in reverse. "Make it stop!" shouted Jack. It was too late. The museum's gift shop had been destroyed. Now, in something of a panic, the boy pulled the nearest handle and the ancient tank surged forward at terrific speed. Smash! It demolished the wall of the museum with a laughable ease. Getting the hang of the Mark V now, the pair drove the tank backwards and forwards a few times to make sure the hole was big enough for the Spitfire's wing. Smash! Bang! Crash! Then they scrambled out of the tank and rushed back over to the Spitfire. They leapt up onto the wing and climbed into the cockpit. As with most World War II fighter planes, there was just one seat, so the boy sat on his grandfather's lap. "Cosy in here, isn't it?" Squadron Leader remarked the old man. For the first time in his life, Jack was sitting in a real Spitfire. His dream was coming true. After all those years of playing pilots with his grandfather, the inside of the plane was exactly as the old man had described. There was an instrument panel with dials for speed and altitude, and below that was a compass. The gun sights were, of course, at head height. Between the boy's knees was a control column. At the top of the stick was the most thrilling part, a button to fire the machine guns. Grandpa went through his checks. Canopy secure? Check. Propeller set to low? Check. Battery on? Check. Flaps up and trimmed? Navigation equipment? Flight instruments? Check. Fuel. Fuel empty? Jack's eyes turned to the fuel gauge. It was indeed empty. Here they were, all dressed up, with nowhere to go. "You stay here, Squadron Leader," said Grandpa. "What are you going to do?" asked the boy. "One of us is going to have to get out and push." And tomorrow we'll pick up at chapter 56, which is entitled "Fill Her Up." I wonder if they managed to get the plane out of the Imperial War Museum.